Okay, well, let me offer greetings to all of you and a word of appreciation for joining us today. We're going to make all the introductions very brief, so I'm going to turn the time over almost immediately to the leader of this program. I do want to encourage all of you to create an account for the Adventist Bioethics Consortium if you haven't done so already, and you do that by just going to adventistbioethics.org and creating an account in the ordinary way. If you're in an organization that is not participating in the consortium, reach out to us at bioethics@llu.edu. That's Loma University, of course, but bioethics@llu.edu, and we'll work with you on that. So just those two words of encouragement. And now I want to turn the time over to Dr. Grace Wee. Dr. Wee is the Associate Director of the Center for Christian Bioethics, and she's also the leader of our clinical ethics program at Loma University Health. She's a pediatrician and a pediatric intensivist, and she also has a graduate degree in bioethics, in addition to her medical degree. So, Dr. Wee, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Winslow. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar series. Again, we are wanting to highlight work that's being done across the consortium. I'm so delighted to have our first three presenters today. I think you will agree at the end that these presentations have been well worth our time. And so I want to thank all the presenters in advance. Also, with the goal of getting our presenters the maximum time, I'll just be doing a very brief introduction. Our first presenter is Dr. Ernest Bursey, the Professor of Religion in the Department of Health and Biomedical Sciences with AdventHealth University. And with that very brief introduction, I'm going to stop my screen share, and Dr. Bursey, it's all yours.
Oh, you'll need to unmute, Dr. Bursey.
That's right. See if we can get it to come up properly. There we go. And I think I want to be on this one so that we get all of it. So it comes through there. Have I got it right now? Let's see if it works. Healthcare ministry, commissioned and constrained, alternately the tale of two Christian communities. I'm going to see if I can get rid of pictures here for a minute so I have the full screen. Okay. Extending the healing ministry of Christ is the mission of AdventHealth, which is my employer. From its webpage, the mission calls us to be his hands and feet in helping people feel whole. Our story is one of hope, one that strives to heal and restore the body, mind, and spirit. Or our calling is to provide whole person care that tends to body, mind, and spirit, just as Christ did during his earthly ministry. And so I have a question with that in mind that I'm asking, does this mission leading to wholeness include, among other things, extending Christ's invitation, come, follow me? Or in Jesus' own words, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And this may be a rhetorical question, but should AdventHealth and other institutions of faith, healthcare, convey this invitation? And if so, how? Jesus later on gave orders at the end of this story in Matthew to his missionaries. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me, and you know the rest of it. Go therefore and disciple all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded. So you're seeing a note of authority there from a new king. In the 1932 medical ministry compilation of Ellen White's writings, there was a copy of something that had appeared earlier in the 1923 Councils on Health, which itself was copied from a circular among healthcare personnel sometime prior to her death in 1915. Every physician should labor as one of God's ministers to teach repentance and salvation of soul and body. That seems to probably not be a major emphasis, but in my course with what my PT students and the PT chair, we have them read a book called Gray Matter. A neurosurgeon discovers the power of prayer, one patient at a time. So the idea of an intentional contact spiritually, even leading to presenting the gospel message as Dr. Levy understands it with his surgical patients, is still alive and well in some quarters. Crucial questions. What role should a Christian-based healthcare system and its employers embrace in 2020 in helping fulfill the gospel commission? On the other hand, what practical and ethical constraints impact AdventHealth and others in fulfilling that gospel commission? Let's look at the realities, and you may have more to add than I, and I've spent some time discovering these. There's, first of all, the primacy of patient autonomy. That's the foundation of bioethics today. Patients come with their own faith. They don't come to have it changed. And then there's the recognition of the power differential between the patient and the professional when the professional starts urging or suggesting faith decisions. We also have a religiously diverse group of employees and physicians, Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, Christians. We have a religiously diverse community constituency, which we hope to retain in good favor in a competitive market. And then we have short-term high-tech care rather than lengthy, quote, sanitarium care, which was the great ancestor, for example, sanitarium of AdventHealth here in Florida. And maybe also the lower patient mortality rate. So we have less maybe of a sense of a need to prepare them for the next part on their life journey. And we have chaplains, trained spiritual hospitalists who can do it better than us or better than we can. On the other hand, there are opportunities for mission. In my institutions, prayer is encouraged by all parties, whether it be environmental services, nurses, imagers, whatever. But proselytizing clearly is not. And that's another whole subject in itself. We know as early as the 1960s, there were directives given to persons going into chaplaincy that they not engage in any of that sort of thing. But I can show you manuals for nurses from Catholic years back in the 1940s when it was very much part of their life. Before offering prayer, get permission. And then there are the team huddles that often have prayer. And there's artwork that everyone can see when they walk in the buildings and around the corridors. Some of it's massive on biblical themes, sometimes scriptural selections that are encouraging. And then in our institution, the AdventHealth assessment that now includes queries about the patient's love, joy, and peace, which engenders follow-up for patients at risk in a very intentional way. And could there be more? I suspect so. Well, given the kind of constraints that we live with in modern healthcare, it turns out that we have an unexpected ally. And I have to tell you, this came to me with my PhD in New Testament studies as a surprise when I actually read through the New Testament letters to scattered Christians who were in the urban churches in the Mediterranean as to how these Christians should witness to their neighbors in their faith. And to my surprise, I failed to find any directive to evangelize their non-Christian neighbors by taking any initiative to preach Jesus or to confront their neighbors with the claims of the Gospels. To repeat, there are none. Let's look at the evidence. First, we have a letter written probably by the time of the book of Revelation in the same area. Pliny the governor writes to Trajan when he's interviewing people who he thinks have been accused of being Christians. And those who a third time persist in saying that they are, he orders them executed. And then he tortures 2 slaves to find out truth. And all he gets is depraved, excessive superstition. I think you get the flavor. Here's the earliest drawing we have of Jesus that exists today. And it's also the earliest depiction of crucifixion in the Greco-Roman world. It's a picture of a man, Alexamenos, showing his allegiance to his God. That's the word scrawled in ungrammatical Greek. And his God turns out to be a figure on a cross with the head of a jackass. And I won't need to tell you any more about what all that means. So, realities, let's look at it clearly. They had no place of worship, maybe the synagogue, except private homes, and we talk about meeting secretly outside the city in that case. They were viewed as followers of a Christos pretender. They caused riots among the Jewish population. They gave allegiance to a crucified criminal as a deity, and they believed he would soon return to overthrow the Roman Empire. They were endangering the world by refusing to honor the legitimate protecting deities. They attracted the lowest classes and slaves. They broke up families, subverted social hierarchies, and they were reported to engage in secret sex scandals, not necessarily in restaurants, but in private homes. So how did Christians respond? Well, it's fascinating to see the advice that are given by several Christian leaders. Paul writes to the Christians living in Rome itself. He says, live at peace. Don't repay anyone evil for evil. Do what's right in the eyes of everybody. Give everybody what you owe. Love your neighbor as yourself. Keep the commandments. Do no harm to the neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. It's quite a bit of long material in those 2 chapters about how to live with your hostile neighbors or suspicious neighbors. And then to Colossae, Paul wrote, sort of like, wait until they ask. Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. That implies somebody else asked the questions first. And then in Thessalonica, you earn respect there. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, to work with your hands, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders. And then Peter, writing to all through the what's now the area of Turkey, live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God. Honor everyone. This is a 4-liner. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the king. That tells you that they were not to be engaged in emperor worship, but not denigrating the emperor either. And then the crown jewel, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And I think any organization thinking about mission needs to consult this one with its profusion of second plural personal pronouns and verbs. And structurally, it moves from establishing the corporate identity and mission in 5:13 to 3 to 16 to strategies, case studies, to and through all the way up through 6:18, and then quite extensive ways to understand about support in this risky process, and also policies to avoid. Looking more closely, notice the corporate and market identities, if I can use that language. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. There you have the identity and the market outlined boldly. And then we have identity symbols, and these symbols are for resident believers, not itinerant ones. You are the light of the world. A city cannot be hidden. You can't move a hospital. You can't move a city. You can't move out of where you are, and if you're living in that community. The lamp and the house, again, symbols of residence rather than itinerancy. And then you have the corporate mission, which is quite clear. Let your light, plural again, shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and result in praising your Father in heaven. And immediately want to know what kind of good deeds Jesus has in mind, and he doesn't disappoint us. And you can read that chapter through and see what he has in mind. It starts first with healthy relationships within the family, the corporate family, getting along with each other, being at peace, providing a safe place to work, self-control of individuals, stability and promise keeping, extended to covenants and faithfulness. And then a very strong statement about truth telling and integrity. In advertising, always tell the truth. And then the most amazing part, which is left at the end, unexpected, creative, and undeserved acts of kindness. This word is worth reading through. It's really quite a striking list of actions that were available to poor people living in that world. And finally, this amazing thing of praying for your enemies and loving them. But not on display is, he goes on into some detail, and I find that exactly interesting. No conspicuous religious offerings, no conspicuous religious rituals, no displays of public prayer. In other words, ethical integrity under pressure wins over mere religiosity. So now we have it, a tale of two kingdom outposts, one of first century faith-based house churches and one of 21st century faith-based healthcare corporations. They both have a mission mandate growing out of their allegiance to Jesus Christ. Both are under pressure to avoid direct evangelism, though with different impediments and social standing. Both permanently embedded in local communities like a city on a hill. And regardless of challenges, the demand for viable strategies to achieve the mission still remains. What's needed then? What's needed is a retranslation of Matthew 5:18 to 48, which lays out the recommended strategies for organizations that claim Jesus' name. And we would ask, if Jesus were speaking to faith-based healthcare corporations and providers, what strategic initiatives might he suggest? What corporate ethos and ethical standards would he support? What leadership style would he expect? And what relationships with competitors and providers and contractors would he approve as the kind of good works that can lead others to entrust themselves to him in 2020? I'd like to stop there, but I'll go one more quick slide just to remind us that there's this Adventist emphasis. And I ask the question, would the AdventHealth Board of Trustees or Adventist Health be satisfied if the ministry of AdventHealth employees led patients and others to accept Jesus as Lord, but not membership in the Adventist Church? Or more positively, what Adventist beliefs and practices could serve to enhance the mission of bringing wholeness and healing? So there it is. How did I do on time, Grace?
Oh, that was fantastic. You know, we have time for one question. I want to get to that. Fantastic presentation. So here's the question. How does an Adventist health system deal with failure to uphold a proper representation of Christ, since failure is inevitable, especially as a witness to people who carry resentment towards the church?
I'm trying to absorb all that when my mind's still reading. We're talking about employees here.
It says failure to uphold a proper representation of Christ. I would probably say employees.
Well, that's more than a rhetorical question. We can't make everybody feel they were fairly treated, but it seems to me we should go the second and third mile to remove all doubt. And I can tell a story here about a student, the email I got this week, but I'm going to go over my time on that one. If you're reamed out, you don't return with a counter lawsuit immediately. I'll put it that way. There's another question here. Would Jesus urge our financial leaders to be satisfied with anything beside the highest possible profit margins as our goal? Our goal isn't profit. Profit is a means to sustain the mission. That's what we do, to sustain and expand the mission. It's not our goal. At least that's my understanding. We all want our paychecks.
And I see Jeff Brummy also has written here, he would not have to, since that is not our goal. So yes.
Okay, I think we can agree, Jeff. Okay.
And then Dr. Carr responds, I've highlighted our finance officers.
Well, it's easy to pick on those people, and they tend to look at numbers and not think quite so quickly about people. But it does turn out that we count on them to keep it solvent. And there's always tension, but hopefully not adversarial relationship between people concerned about financial foundation and those who are concerned about mission outreach.
I am so sorry to say that we're actually out of time. Thank you again for a wonderful presentation. And we are going to find a way to make sure that these questions get over to Dr. Bursey. So if you want to go ahead and keep typing in questions into the chat, we have our grad students who are collating the questions, and then we will be collecting them and then emailing them to Dr. Bursey so that he can give a little bit more comment to that. So thank you again, Dr. Bursey. I'm going to go ahead and turn to our next set of presenters. Our next presenters, Dr. Covrig and Dr. Ongo, both from Andrews University. Dr. Covrig is a professor of leadership and ethics with the College of Education and International Services. Dr. Mordekai Ongo is with Research Integrity and Compliance Officer with the Office of Research and Creative Scholarship. So welcome, both of you. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is the screen up? Good, good.
Yes, it is. We want to add that the views we express are our own, not necessarily those of Andrews University or the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We know of no conflict of interest. Our goal today is to move on to three areas. That is to talk about the what, the who, and the how. The what, we want to highlight attributes of moral leadership. And for the who, we want to promote a distributed view of leadership. Leading is a team activity. All moral voices contribute to responsible conduct. And the last one, we want to explore ways individuals and groups cultivate this shared moral character of leadership, the how.
And there's obviously no way we're going to cover this well, so we're going to also throw in further reading for the rest of you throughout, because we'll just scratch the surface on this. So let's look at the what. Leadership and organizing are very complex social activities requiring intellectual, relational knowledge, competencies, effective personal and group learning, responsiveness to clients, attention to the environment, good timing, effective communication, innovative vision. I mean, it's a complex world, leadership and organizing. We like this particular model because it also includes character. Character is essential for effective leading and effective organizing. Now, character has always been part of leadership scholarship, and in the field that Dr. Ongo and I work, education, it's a central aspect of education, character development. But recently, character and character development has had kind of a renaissance in the literature. And this is just a few of the excellent books out there that have a high amount of emphasis on leadership character.
And so we want to look at one model. Crossan and colleagues provide a useful leadership model. It includes 11 leader character dimensions, as you can see on the screen. The 10 form a constellation around the 11th on judgment. Together, they contribute to making an authentic, competent, ethical leader. The 10 elements: transcendence, drive, collaboration, humanity, humility, integrity, temperance, justice, accountability, and courage, when connected to a leader or a group who possess the judgment attribute, brings the character of leadership to their work. Now, central to this model is judgment. Judgment is vital to leading and organizing well. It is the lever of action and change that brings well-being. It is also a group activity. Making judgment involves understanding environment, seeing complex issues, being analytical and decisive and critical, intuitive, insightful, pragmatic, and adaptable. Unfortunately, their model does not offer a robust view of their transcendence dimension. Here is where the Adventist faith can add much to understanding leadership character.
So secular models are great, but we also can draw from our own field extensive understanding of Adventist faith to mix with these secular models. Recently, a doctoral student of ours, Cecia Pimentel, did a fascinating study that I want to illustrate this tapping into the Adventist faith tradition. Her dissertation is on Adventist healthcare founding governing principles and how they apply to 21st century hospitals. She and I actually have already done a presentation, and it's currently uploaded to the Loma University Global Health Conference that happens next week. And so I want to encourage you, it's a free conference. This is the first time it's free to everybody. And I want to encourage you to sign up for it. And there's tons of videos that they're already uploaded on that. And so you get her material or download her dissertation. She's currently in Rwanda, helping her husband start a new medical school there. But she takes Ellen White's early visions and she categorizes 12 basic principles from those early visions, has Adventist historians critique some of her take on it, and then she went to talk to 26 hospital leaders and 4 focus groups to see what they thought of these 12 principles, had an intense discussion. I was there at all 4 of those, helping her take notes and keeping track of stuff. Now, obviously we don't have time to go over these. Fascinating study. Here are the 12 principles. They're not what people mostly think. Yeah, sunlight is not one of them. Those are different. Those are health practices. These are healthcare principles. How do you deliver healthcare? And I've highlighted 4 that I think ethicists would be interested in and talking about. In fact, thank you, Dr. Bursey. Number 3, discreet witnessing to non-believers. She does an excellent job of talking about, Ellen White pushes people to have these conversations, but how do you respect vulnerability and truth and stuff? Another one is this idea of unwavering biblical principles. You know, nobody seems to like the word unwavering anymore. Can we nuance that? But excellent. The one that most ethicists would probably gravitate to is principle number 12. How do you create an organization culture of sacrifice, hospitality, faith, and piety? She does an excellent job of discussing the cultural compliance that goes with that. But the one I particularly enjoy is number 8. This whole idea of preparing people to be holy before God is one of the principles she identified. She modifies that using current terminology to be, how do you get them to be whole with God or reconciled with God, which is some fascinating principles. And the reason we bring these in is it reminds us that faith also deepens the sense of moral character in Christian and especially Adventist organizations, which leads us, the faith question leads us now to the who and the how of, once you recognize some of the components of moral character, how do you get that into the system, and who do you hold accountable? Well, the good news on the who is it's everybody is held accountable. There is no way that these 11 qualities, right? There's no way that the complex world of morality that is constantly in different cultures can be in one person or even a team of 3 people. You really need a large leadership culture where everybody is leading. And this is why we've always liked Ira Shaliff's book in our programs, who emphasizes the role of followers and creating kind of this leadership dynamic. Don't expect the leader to be the only one who has moral leadership. Expect everybody to have that sense of moral leadership. And we believe the who, everyone, helps us also with the what, because one of the biggest diseases of effective moral leadership is what I call the I disease. Isaiah 14, I will ascend to the Most High. Isaiah 14 talks about this ascendancy model of leadership. And this ascendancy model of leadership comes in all of us, right? It whelms up with our children. It whelms up wherever we are. And so controlling this is to distribute leadership. And this is why I'm concerned about the growth of this kind of I dynasties in China and Russia, somewhat in the United States even now, where people abandon this shared sense of moral leadership. Everybody has an opportunity to add to the moral voice. I'm especially concerned for Adventist healthcare. We have some strong interlocking directorates in the way we govern Adventist healthcare that I think might be squeezing out healthy diversity and moral creativity and resilience. So everyone needs to be involved.
Yeah, as Dr. Duane says, everyone needs to be involved in moral leadership. Gonzalez, 2013, states in an article titled Essay on the Responsibility to Teach Ethics that teaching ethics should be part of the job of all faculty members in all disciplines. This shared collaborative approach in teaching ethics creates an environment where it becomes easier to comply. For example, trainees from developing nations have particular trouble with US standards of scholarly writing and are at significantly higher risk for committing plagiarism than their US peers. They need training and support. Hateman and Petty, 2010, emphasizes the duty of teaching ethics in an article preparing students to navigate cross-national differences in the research environment, the role of research integrity education. We need to help each other understand and embrace the shared standards and become competent in these areas. Essentially, in teaching ethics, we grow ethical leaders who in turn cultivate a culture of ethical leadership at their own institutions.
So this we actually is part of the solution of the how. Once we understand who should be leading, which is all of us, we start having a better mindset of how we develop moral leadership culture in our organizations. And there's three primary areas we can also divide up. We have policy and organizational issues. There needs to be good policies, structures, feedback loops. We also have peer activities we engage in. And of course, we all have to come back to the personal work of moral development as well.
So again, this shared collaborative approach in teaching ethics creates an environment and raises our awareness of how federal and state regulations influence how we do ethical research and to comply with them. It leads to increased awareness of international, understanding of international codes and regulations, increased awareness of institutional written procedures and policies. What I'm saying that in general, it becomes easier to comply with these regulations, whether the Department of Health and Human Services or Food Drug Administration or international codes and regulations. We want to submit to you that in complying with the regulations, we are collectively helping investigators, practitioners, and to avoid, committing research misconduct, which includes falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism.
Really, compliance is organizational learning together, right? Shared learning means you reach out of the organization and you find what other conversations or morality exists. So if we come back to what's happening in local teams really, the team of an organization is where much of the moral development can take place. And we don't have time to go over it, but nudge is a great theory of how do you nudge behavior, not only in eating candy bars, but how to tell the truth, right? Nudging behavior. We had Rex Miller, the middle book, Healthy Workplace, speak to our leadership students a couple of years ago. I love his work on how healthy people, culture, and buildings can lead to high performance. And the book I'm reading right now, actually, Pursuing God's Will Together, the discernment practices for leadership groups is phenomenal on how to bring in some of the spiritual practices into a team. But let's end with ourselves, because we are the moral leaders that needed in our organizations. And these are two of the books that have helped me the most think about this. On one end, we want to avoid a rigid legalism, but we don't want to avoid the development of the Spirit as he prunes us in the character of Christ. And I find N.T. Wright's book, After You Believe, to be a very just winsome way of convincing us as Christians that character matters. In fact, that's his subtitle, Why Christian Character Matters. He talks about, hey, we're getting ready for a new kingdom. Why not practice here is one of his basic themes. And then Terry Watson, this is one of my top 20 favorite books of all time. She talks about developing clinicians of character. Her work is phenomenal in looking at how she looks at the 7 virtues. And I just put this on the screen. You have to get the book. But she takes 7 virtues. She looks at them through theological as well as psychological literature. Phenomenal blending of the two. I love it. I've always been one who wants to blend these two, and she does it better than anybody else. Then she connects it to professional codes of ethics, virtues to codes of ethics, then integrates the theories in her field, which is counseling psychology, and then talks about spiritual practices for each of these. So there's much we can each do to raise the moral leadership character of our institutions, and we have to end. Mordekai, can you read this promise from the Holy Spirit to us?
Sure. So this is how we would end. To him, from the book of Jude 24:25, to him who is able to keep you from stumbling and to present you before his glorious presence without fault and without great joy, to the only God, our Savior, be glory, majesty, power, and authority through Jesus Christ our Lord, before all ages, now and forever. Amen.
So we have the Holy Spirit always to help us. So at this time, we'll take some questions.
Wow, thank you so much. I really love that. So here's one question that came in. Based on your experience as educators for both Dr. Covrig and Ongo, are leaders naturally gifted, or can the traits of leadership be effectively taught? Or is it some combination of gifts and training? In other words, can moral integrity be taught?
I hope so. I hope it can be. That book, Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Well, it usually takes us a little bit longer than one day in kindergarten, but I do think all along the life cycle of a person, we can learn socially appropriate behaviors. We can learn savvy behaviors that influence people. Really, leadership is influence. How do you influence people? Well, you learn that throughout life. What not to say, that didn't help. What to say, that helps. So I do think it can be nurtured. And that's what I make my business doing, trying to nurture leadership development in people.
And just to piggyback on that, 4 years ago I was at a conference in Wisconsin. This was a OHRP conference, Office of Human Subject Protections. And somebody said on the stage that institutions, Christian institutions, are better off on issues of morals because they talk about these things more often. We can teach Bible, we can draw verses from the Bible more regularly. They're taught in church. We say them more often. So people begin to learn what is right and what is wrong. So we can nudge the character that embraces these ethical values.
So much. We have 2 minutes before we go on to our next speaker. There are a couple comments about nudge theory. Would you like to just give us, well, here's one from Dr. Carr. Absolutely love nudge theory, and meta nudges might be the best part. Any ethical issues with the use of nudge theory? Does virtue ethics account for and allow it?
Yes, I think that's what mothers do. I mean, it's amazing how much mothers do, and somebody else gets a Nobel Peace Prize for. Or Nobel Prize for. I mean, it's mothers have nudged behavior. My wife nudges me quite well, and so I think it's in the way we say something. One of my favorite books is by Edgar Schein. He wrote it when he's 82 years old, well-known organizational cultural theorist, and he wrote the book called Humble Inquiry, The Art of Asking Instead of Telling. Fabulous book. He argues that if you go into a situation asking questions, you yourself initiate in other people's minds some leadership skills. Why? Because you raise awareness of the issue by instead of telling them, just asking them to observe something. So I do think nudging is taking place constantly, and asking is one way to do that. What's happening here? How's everybody feeling?
So it's pretty much encouraging. When you take the positive reinforcement aspect, you are encouraging people to embrace that which is good. And so I think it is a good theory that helps without necessarily violating ethical virtues.
Thank you so much for that. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say that we are out of time, but thank you so much for your presentation. For those that we didn't get to your questions, please continue to submit them. We are going to collate the questions and then email to our presenters for their comment. And I also want to say that these questions are getting my creative juices flowing. And so don't be surprised if these questions then become well, they will bear fruit hopefully in other sorts of programs and workshops coming up. So thank you so much again, Dr. Covrig, Dr. Ongo, really appreciate it. Let's go ahead and move to our last presenter. Let me go to my, oh, there we go. Our last presenter is Dr. Gudrun Klim. I first got to know Dr. Klim when she was doing her PhD here at Loma Linda, and always enjoyed seeing her face and interacting with her. She lives in Washington now as a nurse bioethicist with Providence Health and Services in Eastern Washington and Montana. So thank you, Dr. Klim, for presenting to us. The time is yours. Oh, and Gudrun, you're not unmuted yet.
Yes, can you see my screen? I click share screen and it does not happen.
I can bring up your slides, not a problem.
It worked earlier and now it doesn't. I do not know.
Technology. Here we go.
All right. If you click, I say next and then we keep on going. Okay, so this is my first slides. The second one, I work here in Providence. It's a Catholic institution and enjoy it very much. These are the credits that I want to give for supporting me in my study. And next, I was very interested in empathy, to be honest. And it is a social glue that connects people. And with the exception of some psychiatric disorders or brain injury, everybody can participate in giving and receiving empathy. Next. It has made great strides in empathy research. We have found out, the first one was Dr. Tanja Singer at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, that empathy follows exact neurological pathways in the brain. And they're very different for cognitive empathy and for emotional empathy. Next. So both pathways are different. The cognitive one is that does not come immediately. It is when you see something, you say, oh, I think I want to help. The affective part of empathy is that, oh, how cute. Oh, I'm really sorry, which happens automatically. So one is more like a reflex, that's the affective part, and one is the cognitive part that engages you in thinking and asks you to evaluate a situation. Next. Next. We are, good. I'm interested in social empathy. It was established and developed by Dr. Elizabeth Siegel. She is a social worker and political scientist, and it takes empathy a step further. It takes the social background of a person into considerations when we're talking about empathy. It's a deeply understand the people where they're coming from. Like in this COVID-19 situation, not all of us get the same treatment as number one. So for many people, it's very, very difficult. Next. For Dr. Siegel, social empathy leads to social justice. It is the ultimate outcome. It takes many things. It takes empathy, the different part, affective, cognitive, and cognitive decision-making, that I want to care for this patient. And with that, it propels me to do something, which is social empathy. Next. She developed several tools, and one of them is this interpersonal social empathy index. And she divides that measuring tool of empathy into 4 segments: the affective response, the self-other awareness, which means I know this must be horrible, but it's not my own pain. The cognitive one that says, okay, I really have to step in and I should help. And the macro perspective taking one is, wow, there is some discrimination going on here. And I think we are having problems because of issues of bad housing, lack of access to healthcare, etc. Next. And there we come to the upstream causes and the social determinant of health. Neighborhoods, my education, my financial means, they all have an incredible influence on patients' health. They influence the morbidity and mortality and the quality of life. Next. If you ever have a chance, go to Bertolt Brecht and read his poem, A Worker's Speech to a Doctor. It's absolutely revealing. He says, how do you know? Look at my clothes, then you know where my disease is coming from. So it is not just always that's a biological reason for what we're doing. Next. This was from 2014, and I find this very poignant. Your zip code is a better predictor of your health than your genetic code. This is absolutely fascinating study. Next. This was a Catholic archbishop. When I feed the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask them why they're poor, they call me a communist. So as Adventists, we are often taking care in healing the patients, but we have to heal communities as well. Next. The effects on empathy on wellness. We often think, oh, empathy is just this fuzzy little emotion that makes us warm around the heart, but it's more than that. If patients feel that their physicians are empathic about their illness, they have better scores, they have better A1C in diabetic, they get over their colds more often. And a Chinese study found that the immune response to cancer cells is affected by being in an empathic environment by nurses. Next. So this was the study of, or the purpose of my study. I wanted to find out how empathic, there's lots on physicians, but I wanted to find out how empathic are nurses and what are the factors that are associated with being empathic. Next. I chose these factors. There was another one that we left by the wayside, which was political affiliation. And even when we conducted this study, we thought that was too hot of a topic, we left it out. So these are the ones that we chose. Next. This was a sample. I am now at Providence, and it is a large affiliated hospitals within one system. And we send it out to every registered nurse, and it went anonymous, and it went through a secure link, and this is the results. Next. So these are the tools that we chose. The survey was about 60 questions. We asked demographic questions, and then we used the interpersonal and social empathy index. That's the one that we are asking for social empathy among nurses. And again, these questions were split in 4 sections. And then we had the social issues advocacy scale, the self-compassion scale, the single burnout measure, and a brief trust and mistrust in God scale, because at Loma Linda and in Providence, we are a faith-based institution. We wanted to know, does it make a difference if our caregivers or nurses, in our case, have a belief in God in a higher power? Next. These were the statistical tests that we performed. Next. So, how empathic were the nurses? We found out pretty much 80%, 79.666% score. That was a score that they had. So it was a fairly high score that we felt that nurses in general had high scores on the empathic scale. The highest scale, however, was the effective response. And I will talk about it later, about difference between a male and female. And nurses so far is still a female-dominated profession, and so this is not a surprise. Next. Okay, feeling supported. We did ANOVAs, and we found out that when the employees, the nurses, felt supported by their institution to spend extra time, to be caring, they had higher rates of empathic scores. So it correlated with empathic scores and feeling supported by your institution. Next. And the other thing that I wanted personally to know, having received government subsidies, was that significantly associated with higher empathic scores? And yes, indeed. I wanted to know if I have personally experienced hardship somehow, somewhere in my life, and I got help without saying, I do it on my own and I'm strong, does that make people more empathic? And yes, if people know hardship, it makes them more empathic. Next. These were our Pearson correlation. And yes, we have lots of correlations between the total ISEI and subscales and other scales. Next. So for the Pearson variables, we found out that if the nurses scored high on the social issues advocacy and self-compassion, they scored high and significantly high on the empathy part. However, we found also out that trust in God did not affect one bit the empathy part. Next. The work-related variables. Well, burnout, as you can see, minus, it was inversely related to empathy. So if you become so burned out, you start depersonalizing your patients, they become just numbers and you want to get your shift, you are much less likely to be empathic. And we found out also management versus staff nurses, management had higher empathic scores than regular RNs. So we started wondering why. We didn't know it was a result that we got. And we surmised maybe that when you're in a managerial position, in a leadership position, you have more training in understanding other people because you have to manage and you have to bring your team together. That was one of our suggestions. Next. And then male versus female. And yes, the female outscored the male by a wide margin. And that is because females in general tend to have higher percentage of affective empathy rather than cognitive empathy, where males engage more in cognitive empathy than affective empathy. Both empathy are wonderful and good. And actually, why I was after this whole study about empathy is the cognitive part of empathy can be taught. That is something that we consciously can go engage in. The affective part is sort of like an emotional response. It's like a reflex. But the cognitive part, to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, is something we can train. Next. Now, when we put everything together, the demographic variables, the personal variables, and the work-related variables, we found significant results in age, advocacy scale, self-compassion, burnout, overtime. Overtime, it's not a good idea necessarily. And then your nursing degree and your current nursing position. These were all significant indicators. Next. This is a discussion. Finally, we found out that empathy, as well as social empathy, is a huge contributor to patients' health in a positive way. Therefore, it behooves us to teach it and support it in a nurturing environment. And so, next. Social empathy is a conscious choice. It is not something that we just, like you said earlier, your mom did it already. It's something that we learn. It is something that we can learn. It's the suggestion that everybody needs to taught ethics. Social empathy can be taught. And being considerate and empathic when one disagreeing with another person is not easy. Indeed, it takes will. When my patient belongs to an out group, when he is a patient who comes in continuously for a drug addiction disorder, then I need to have more than just a fuzzy feeling towards a patient. I have to make this conscious choice. I'm kind, I'm respectful, I'm caring. This is what I'm talking about. Next. At the end, I want to say you're never too young, next, or too old to give and receive empathy. Thank you very much. And at the end, if you want to, I have a whole list of references.
Thank you so much. Wonderful work that you've done. We have time for a couple of questions. If the empathy of nurses is significantly related to better outcomes for patients, should we increase our efforts to select those nurses who test highly for empathy when we are hiring?
I would think we should start in our schools to teach empathy and to teach ethics, to be very, very cognizant about the impact of it, and really, really have teaching modules that promote empathy. I know in physicians trainings, we already teach ethics, and we are trying, many places are trying to teach empathy. I think for nurses, we need to do that too.
There was a question, just for clarification, what was the direction in the age correlation? Are older people more empathetic, or are younger people more empathetic?
It was the younger ones that are more empathetic, not the older ones. It's like you get calluses, and you have seen this already, and you shrug it off. It's like we were surprised by that. We were surprised by the managerial position. And we were surprised with some correlations within the factors. Like, for instance, the higher the trust in God was, the less we had self-empathy or self-compassion. That means people who trust in God are more likely to beat themselves up. And this is sometimes the rigid structure of being religious and not having mercy on oneself. At the same time, trust in God was also higher trust in God was correlated with less burnout. These were among the factors and not with the total empathy scores, but these were the sideline results that emerged as well.
Thank you so much. There are many more questions in the chat, and again, thank you for your presentation and your fantastic work. I look forward to continuing these conversations in other venues. I do want to take the time here to invite you back. We have parts 2 and 3 coming up in November, and our Center for Christian Bioethics will email all of you reminders about those upcoming presentations. We have 6 more fantastic presentations that we will be highlighting. So thank you again for your attendance. Again, come back for parts 2 and 3. And the last thing I'm going to do is just throw in a plug for our Adventist Bioethics Conference in 2021. Please look for more information coming up there. We're wanting to, again, feature work across the consortium at the conference at 2021. So also be thinking of work that you can share with our colleagues all across the world, actually. Thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.